Joe Biden's cognitive decline. Nothing special, just an episode requested by a few people. Here's why I'm doing this. Yes, we talk about politics, but I've also had a health issue that I still am sick with. But I used to be very, 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 very sick. So for several years in my life, I didn't walk, didn't talk, couldn't read. I was severely cognitively disabled. I've always been just so lucky that my mental health has been, amazing. I have needed to do some work on one issue in particular that I had, and it's amazing to feel totally free from it. But at the level of depression or anxiety, it's just never been part of my life on any level. But the cognitive disability was to do with the neuroinflammation I had in my worst years after I got sick with myalgic encephalomyelitis. And myalgic encephalomyelitis is stuff that you can read about by going to Mepedia, because there's a lot of crap written about it. It's a neuroimmune condition. It doesn't have any psychological components any more than other serious illnesses do. So what's that got to do with Joe? Look, I spent a lot of time not being able to link words, not be able to look at a book and follow what's there. In fact, when I learned to read again, I just had a ritual where I was just about physically well enough to get driven to a cafe, and I'd sit there for just 10 minutes and be driven back. And in these 10 minutes, I would read 2 to 3 sentences, and that's all I could comprehend at a push. And I did that for months. So what's that left me with? It's left me with a very quick physical intuition about pretty much any kind of health issue that somebody has, especially if they're trying to masquerade it and hide it. So if I walk into a room and somebody's in pain, physical pain, I can immediately see how and where. Or if I walk into a room and somebody is, is having some neurological issues, I can sense it, I can feel it very instinctively, because I know this not just intellectually or even empathetically. I know it from a very deep internal point of view. So when I look at people who have different kinds of cognitive decline, I can judge exactly what it is, what it's not, how bad it is. And when I say I can judge it exactly, I'm lying. I can't. But what I really mean is that it's quick. It's natural for me. I would make some mistakes, but more often than not, I just wouldn't, because I've just been through this stuff so much. So anyway, so that's my experience. So you've got my credentials now. Joe Biden. There is this division, really, about how Joe Biden's supposed cognitive decline is talked about. There are folks, including Joe Rogan, who say, well, it looks like Joe Biden has checked out. He just looks like a goner. It doesn't look like he's functioning properly as a president. Then there are other people who say, well, this is nothing. So David Pacman, for example, here on YouTube says, okay, maybe he's a bit sloppy, but that's reasonable for his age, and Trump is utterly incoherent all the time, so what can you do? How do we arbitrate this? Well, actually, Trump doesn't have any cognitive decline of substance. Trump has huge neurodiversity issues. We're not going to diagnose him here, but he has more than one neurodiversity issue. So, as well as extraordinary narcissism. We're going to put him aside. But it's that makes Trump just jump and be incoherent. With Joe, is there real cognitive decline? Yes, there is. What does it stop him from doing, and what does it not stop him from doing? Here I'm going to disagree a little bit with some of what I've heard Joe Rogan say. And I don't think that Joe's cognitive decline, which is real, is affecting his decision making. I just don't see that. What it is doing is affecting his communication. And I know exactly how he feels. It's a real combination of just the confidence of being in power a lot and being used to power a lot. And it's a kind of confidence which makes you feel, well, I don't give a shit. Whatever, okay, so I can't speak properly anymore. Well, I don't give a shit. So there's a kind of arrogance there in Joe, which is the arrogance of just finding power so familiar and so attractive as well. And then there's fear. And so you can see whenever Joe gets lost, he's conveying both with his eyes. You can see that it's that fear that old people have when they can't quite connect up properly anymore, when they've lost their track of thought and they're gone into space a little bit for a few seconds and they try to come back. That fear is what you see in Joe's eyes. At the same time, there's a lot of arrogance that basically says, well, whatever, who cares? And the problem this creates is that Joe doesn't adjust enough to his cognitive decline. So if I were Joe, what I would do is tone it down a bit and try to not say 3 or 4 things at the same time, especially when one feels one's really not sharp. But Joe just tries to just race through it, and he ends up saying stuff that barely makes any sense a lot of the time. And we've got to acknowledge that's where it's at. Now, is that affecting Joe's decisions? I don't think so. In fact, I'm highly confident it's not. So that's it. I don't see how a decision he'd make today would be very different to a decision he'd make 8 years ago when he was just really, really sharp. So we have said this, but we've got to not confuse ourselves here, because Joe always made gaffes, and that's separate. Joe always made gaffes. He always said silly things. So how do we evaluate this? Let's take one of many recent examples. One of them is that Vladimir Putin shouldn't be in power, which is not America's policy. It's a very grotesquely responsible thing to say. I mean, if I were in a space where that happened, I would want to contain myself, from saying, Joe, out, go away now, stop this, bad boy. I mean, bad idea, just gross. And the reason it's a bit gross is because it's not just cognitive decline, it's that arrogance that Joe has. He's very arrogant about being casual about occupying a position of power and a position of responsibility. And so what happened, he after folks on his behalf toned it down, said, no, the president wasn't meaning that there's any change of policy. But then Joe came out and said, I'm proud of what I said. No, it doesn't signify change of policy, just signifies moral outrage. Now, no analyst would agree there with Joe, because is there a gain for Joe here? Is there a gain for America's national interest? No. Is there a loss? Yes, you've got this crazy thing in the Kremlin that's got paranoia and historical civilizational phantasmagoria, and there isn't a clear way to distinguish what you say from policy if you're the president of the United States. To some extent, what the president of the United States says just is going to sound like policy to people. So sorry, Joe, you can't make that distinction. But the fact that Joe slipped like that and made this gaffe, among many others, that's not about the cognitive decline, but the gaffes are more likely with the cognitive decline. So he's always prone to it. He's a man who can't shut up about this. And it's the same kind of arrogance as Joe's slightly inappropriate physical intimacy. And I'm going to be clear here. I actually have always thought that Joe's inappropriate physical intimacy was innocent. It was just a kind of thoughtless thing. It was a kind of, again, indulgent thing. And it was a kind of expression of engagement and sometimes even care and love, with this little bit of an aspect of everything is a little bit on string and I can sort of do a little bit what I want as long as I'm genuinely warm and positively intentioned. And no, not everything is on a string if you are running for big office. The fact that you stand around being sometimes inappropriately intimate with people is something that you should reflect upon. So that's where we're at. The gaffes aren't caused by the cognitive decline, but they're made more likely by it. The cognitive decline is really real, and it feels a bit painful looking at Joe. Joe's responding to it with fear and arrogance. It's not affecting his decisions very much, but at a time of crisis and elevated nuclear risk, the last thing we want from the President of the United States is ill discipline around speech, even if we're not worried about ill discipline around decision making. So that's basically where I'm at. And I know what it's like to struggle the way Joe is struggling. And I've got to be honest, when I make my videos, especially on the main channel, and you can see how much I can speak well now, how much I can read. When I'm speaking to you, even now, 60% of my energy is going on stringing the words together. And that's because I can speak really well now again, but I'm not quite back to where I was before I was sick. So, for example, before I was sick, I would speak in public and I would say, well, there are 7 points here. And by minute 15, I would arrive at the 7th point. I would never do that now. I would talk about 2 or 3 points. Now, the long game is kind of not affected for me. The quality of my thought is a bit slowed. My spontaneity is a bit impacted. But basically, I can operate at a low level of philosophical genius in my professional work off YouTube. But I now need to make adjustments. I now need to make compensations. And I'm certainly dealing with quite a few things that I'm covering up. And so because I'm covering them up and Joe's covering them up, I know exactly what's going on. I know exactly how bad or not bad it is. So that's basically my assessment. So I think that there are some people, particularly on the right in the States, who overestimate how bad this is, and there are people in the center who play it down inappropriately, and I don't think Joe handles it well. If I were Joe's coach, I would just guide him to be a bit more organic within his limitations, and he'd still communicate fine, but that would mean he wouldn't just boom, 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 try to shoot out speech through a moment when he's really lost. Because then what comes out is just, incoherent, and people mock him, and quite frankly, mock the United States to some extent because of this. So it's tricky. A personal remark, given what I've said. So I haven't said anything about Joe Biden as a politician, Joe Biden's policies, whether he should have run. And bottom line is I'm very critical of Joe's choice to have run for president because of my views about democratic decline and the kind of politicians we need to reverse it. If not reverse it, then slow it down. But I'm going to say something that you've got to understand has got nothing to do with politics. So what I'm saying is compatible with me thinking that Joe could be a terrible politician or a terrible politician today. I like Joe so much. And Joe is real. And I'll tell you how he is real. I've never met him. But if he were in my life, he would genuinely feel the challenge of my health condition. He would be genuinely empathetic. And in the middle of a busy day, he would text me and he would ask me, Vlad, how are you feeling? I need to know. And that would be as real as daylight, as real as anything. So I actually, outside of the conversation about whether he is a constructive political figure today and the conversation about how he's experiencing and handling cognitive decline, I adore him, but that doesn't bear on politics much. So there we go. that's what I've got, and I'll get into the questions and comments below if you have more to say. That's the correct way, in my opinion, on the basis of the amazing health challenges I've been through, to evaluate Joe's cognitive decline. Okay.